The young and the restless spoilers shock Ian Ward's grim deception. A crisp dawn light filtered through the tall windows of Genoa City Memorial Hospital, bathing the hallway in a muted glow. The air was thick with tension and disbelief. Despite all appearances, Ian Ward, formerly presumed dead, had somehow slipped through the cracks. As rumors spread rapidly among the hospital staff, hushed conversations and furtive glances betrayed the growing fear that the man who haunted so many lives was still very much alive. The aftermath of chaos earlier, paramedics had loaded Ian Ward's seemingly lifeless body into an ambulance, the sirens slicing through the night. Sharon and Mariah stood on the curb, arms crossed tight against their chests, still trembling from the shock of the incident. They hurled curses at Ian's gurney, their voices laced with hatred and desperation. Time and again, the man had manipulated their lives, incited terror, and left emotional wreckage in his wake. "Stay dead, Ian Ward." Mariah spat, her fury barely contained. "If I had my way, I'd make sure you never drew another breath." Sharon placed a steadying hand on her daughter's shoulder, though her eyes reflected the same seething rage. "He's caused too much suffering already. Better that he's gone for good." So certain were they of his demise that neither Sharon nor Mariah noticed the subtle rise and fall of Ian's chest. He lay completely still, feigning the pallor and stillness of death with unnerving skill. No one, not even the paramedics who strapped him down, suspected that beneath the charade, his mind was still whirring like a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. A close call in the ambulance. Once the ambulance doors slammed shut, the paramedics turned their attention away for only a moment, long enough for Ian Ward to peel his eyelids open. His pupils flickered left and right, assessing his surroundings. Heart monitors beeped faintly, and the stench of antiseptic burned his nostrils. Still strapped securely onto the gurney, he suppressed a grimace, inhaling shallow breaths so as not to draw attention. A small bag of medical tools clattered near his foot. If only he could reach it. He strained against the belts around his torso, testing their give without making a sound. Any sudden movement or noise could alert the paramedics in the front cabin. Ian needed a flawless escape, a testament to the meticulous planning he'd honed over decades of cunning schemes. Outside the ambulance, the early morning cityscape raced past. The siren wailed, signaling urgency, an urgency the hospital staff believed was no longer relevant, because in their minds, the occupant on the stretcher was already beyond saving. But this was all part of Ian's plan. The morgue's mistaken guest at the hospital, the morgue attendant, overworked and undercaffeinated, received the ambulance call with a resigned nod. He prepared the paperwork for Ian Ward's body to be placed alongside Jordan, a similarly dangerous figure. To the attendant, this was just another gruesome task in a thankless job. He didn't think twice when the paramedics delivered a zipped body bag. After all, the forms were in order, and there was no doctor to contradict the official cause of death. What no one realized was that the paramedics, in their haste, had not double-checked the vital signs. Their instructions were clear: this body, bullet wounds and all, was to be deposited and logged for further investigation. So Ian arrived at the morgue in eerie silence, hidden in the thick plastic bag meant to hold an actual corpse. Sharon and Mariah, believing they had witnessed his final moments, allowed themselves to breathe a small sigh of relief, though a deeper anger still festered. "He got off too easy," Mariah muttered, clenching her fists. Sharon's response was a slow, solemn nod, her eyes scanning the distance. Even as they tried to move on, doubt lingered in the back of their minds. Could a man so devious really die so quietly? Mariah's dark resolve back at crimson lights, Mariah paced restlessly. The coffee shop's usual warmth provided little comfort. She replayed the memory of Ian's malevolent grin, the one that had taunted her countless times when he was very much alive. A storm brewed within her. She imagined all the ways she could have confronted him, made him pay for his sins. "Mom, you know this is all too neat," she said suddenly, halting in the middle of the cafe. Sharon stood behind the counter, her gaze fixed on a fresh brew dripping into a glass pot. "What do you mean?" Sharon asked, though a tremor of anxiety colored her voice. "That man put us through hell. He controlled me, twisted my life around. And now he's just dead? A bullet hole and we're done? Something's not adding up. Sharon sighed, turning off the coffee machine. Mariah, I'm trying to keep it together here. We have enough problems with Victor in critical condition. If Ian really was alive, she paused as if the very thought was too horrific. No. There's no way. The paramedics would have noticed. But the seeds of doubt had already sprouted in Mariah's mind. She decided, right then and there, that she would sneak down to the morgue herself to make sure Ian Ward was truly gone. A ghastly discovery by the time Mariah reached the hospital basement, a narrow corridor lined with flickering fluorescent lights stretched out before her. The morgue's sterile smell, equal parts disinfectant and the faintest tinge of decay, made her stomach churn. She steeled herself, determined to put an end to her doubts. The attendant on duty gave her a quizzical glance. Family of the deceased? Mariah forced a weak smile and nodded. Yes, Ian Ward. I just needed to see him one last time. Reluctantly, the attendant led her into the mortuary chamber. He pointed to a metal drawer near the corner. He's in there, he said quietly. Mariah approached the drawer with trembling steps. The moment she pulled it open, her heart nearly stopped. It was empty. No zippered body bag, no bullet-ridden corpse. Nothing but the cold steel of the morgue's sliding tray. He was here earlier, the attendant stammered, fumbling through his clipboard. Look, I have the paperwork. This doesn't make any sense. A rush of panic and adrenaline flooded Mariah's veins. Ian Ward's body, dead or alive, had vanished. Ian Ward's escape several floors above, in a disused corner of the hospital, Ian Ward crouched behind a tall cabinet brimming with spare linens. His breathing was ragged, and the bullet wound in his side throbbed. The ballistic vest he wore had stopped the shot from being fatal, but it hadn't spared him from injury. A trickle of real blood, not the fake capsule he had prepared, stained his shirt. Gritting his teeth, he pulled a small first aid kit from inside his coat. He bit back a groan as he cleaned the wound, rummaging for bandages. This was an improvised job, he needed a better solution, but for now, it would have to do. Time was short, and every second spent in the hospital increased the risk of discovery. But one thought fueled his resilience: Victor Newman. Ian's eyes narrowed. He had failed to kill Victor once before. He had left the man gravely wounded, but rumor had it the Newman patriarch was still clinging to life, barely, but enough to frustrate Ian's plan of final revenge. With careful, deliberate movements, Ian rose to his feet, pressing a hand to his side to steady himself. He had to get out of this hospital without detection and regroup. Then, he would finish what he started. He would ensure that Victor Newman never drew another breath. A cold smile formed on his lips at the thought. A web of deception meanwhile, word of the empty morgue tray reached Mariah's ears with terrifying finality. She rushed upstairs, her mind a whirlwind of panic and foreboding. Was he actually still alive? Had he staged his death all along? Her worst fears were confirmed when a frantic nurse mentioned spotting a wounded man limping through a restricted area. The nurse, confused and a bit alarmed, thought he was a patient who had wandered off. Only later did she realize the man matched the description of Ian Ward. Mariah's face went pale. She clutched her phone, the urge to warn everyone in Genoa City buzzing in her thoughts. Especially Sharon. Especially Victor's family, though they already had more than enough trouble with Victor's precarious condition. She dashed into a nearby stairwell, heart pounding as she dialed Sharon. When her mother picked up, Mariah said in a breathless whisper, "Mom, get everyone out of there. Ian Ward is alive. I've seen the proof." Sharon and Mariah sound the alarm. Sharon nearly dropped her phone. She stumbled, gripping the edge of a chair for support. The cafe suddenly felt claustrophobic, the walls pressing in with each frantic heartbeat. "Where are you?" Sharon asked, voice trembling. I'll call the police." Mariah took a shaky breath. "I'm still at the hospital. I have to find him before he disappears for good." "No. Sharon cried out. "Don't do anything reckless. I'll call the authorities right now. You just stay safe. Please." But Mariah had already hung up. A fierce determination settled in her eyes. This was the man who had exploited her, threatened her very identity, and almost destroyed the life she had built in Genoa City. She wouldn't rest until she saw him truly face the consequences of his heinous acts. Ian Ward's next move, unbeknownst to Mariah, Ian Ward had already slipped out a side entrance of the hospital, draping himself in a stolen coat to hide the bloodstains. His posture was hunched in pain, but his mind was sharper than ever. He navigated the alleyways with caution, finally hailing a taxi near a crowded intersection where he could blend in with the morning rush of commuters. As he sank into the back seat, ignoring the driver's idle chatter, his thoughts drifted toward Victor Newman's hospital room. A grim satisfaction coursed through him. If Victor was still alive, Ian intended to finish the job. The question was how. Returning to the hospital would be too risky, especially now that his escape was discovered. He would need a new plan, a fresh opportunity, maybe a moment when Victor's guard was down, or when the Newman family least expected an attack. And then, if all went well, Ian Ward would leave Genoa City forever, with his vengeance complete. The gathering storm back in the hospital, the Newman family remained at Victor's bedside. Nikki clung to the hope that Victor would somehow pull through his injuries, while Nick and Adam argued over the best course of action to protect him. Victoria stared at her father's pallid face, tears staining her cheeks, unaware of the danger creeping ever closer. Security around Victor's room had been increased after the initial shooting, but no one had factored in the possibility of Ian Ward's resurrection. Whispers spread through the hospital's corridors about the man who had cheated death. With each retelling, the tale grew more chilling, and the sense of impending doom tightened like a vice around everyone who heard it. On the brink of disaster as the sun rose higher, illuminating Genoa City's skyline in gold and pink hues, the city's inhabitants went about their lives in blissful ignorance of the new threat lurking in the shadows. Only a handful of people knew the truth: Ian Ward was alive, injured, and more dangerous than ever. He had a singular goal now: to kill Victor Newman once and for all. The question was no longer whether he could pull it off, but when he would strike. Sharon and Mariah, fueled by a mix of rage and righteousness, vowed they would do anything to stop him. Yet the clock ticked relentlessly, and Ian's cunning was unmatched. In a place where secrets and betrayals lay thick as fog, it was anyone's guess who would prevail. Would the Newman family and their allies manage to protect Victor, or would Ian Ward's cruelty claim another victim before the final confrontation? One thing was certain: in Genoa City, the line between life and death was razor thin. And when Ian Ward was involved, the only real certainty was that nothing, and no one, was truly safe. The return of darkness, Ian Ward and Jordan rise again. The shadows of Genoa City had never felt more dangerous. The Newman family believed they had rid themselves of their greatest threats, Ian Ward and Jordan Howard. The world had witnessed their demise. Jordan had swallowed a glass of poison, collapsing before Claire's horrified eyes. Ian had been shot, his body taken to the morgue. But Ian Ward never believed in death. He had faked his own, slipping through the cracks of the hospital's security. Now, he was searching for proof that Jordan had done the same. A suspicion that won't die. Ian sat in the darkened alley behind the hospital, hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. He replayed the scene over and over in his mind. Jordan, always calculating, always a step ahead, had willingly drunk the poison Claire had given her. She had made a show of it, letting her entire body convulse in dramatic agony before slumping into unconsciousness. Too perfect. Too neat. And that's what bothered Ian. Jordan didn't make mistakes. Ian himself had spent decades perfecting the art of deception. He knew a well-orchestrated death when he saw one. The signs were all there: the way she fell, the way her breathing slowed at just the right moment. Ian didn't buy it. And if he was right, that meant Jordan was alive. The thought alone sent a slow, twisted grin spreading across his lips. If Jordan was still breathing, she would have known he'd come looking. They were two alike. And soon, they'd rise from the ashes, together. Breaking into the morgue, Ian worked swiftly. The hospital was still in chaos after his own death, with security on high alert. But Ian wasn't a fool. He didn't just walk through the front door. No, he found another way in. A basement entrance, an old maintenance passageway. He moved like a shadow through the dimly lit corridors, his mind singularly focused. Finally, he reached the cold storage unit where Jordan's body was being held. And just like that, his grin widened. Because she was still here. Jordan's body was zipped inside a sleek black bag, her death certificate already filed. Ian stood over her, tilting his head. "Oh, my dear," he murmured, fingers tapping against the steel table. "Did you really think you could fool me?" He took a deep breath, steadying himself before reaching down. With a slow, deliberate motion, he unzipped the bag. Jordan lay perfectly still. Her face was pale, her lips slightly parted, her hands resting at her sides. But Ian wasn't convinced. He leaned down, pressing 2 fingers to her throat. No pulse. Yet, he still didn't believe it. His fingers grazed her wrist. Nothing. His lips twisted slightly. "Nice trick," he whispered. Ian reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small syringe filled with adrenaline. If Jordan was alive, this would force her back. Without hesitation, he pressed the needle into her chest and injected the full dose. Seconds passed. Then a twitch. A small one. Ian's smile grew wider. Jordan's lips parted in a sharp gasp as she suddenly sucked in air. Her eyes snapped open. For a moment, she lay there, gasping, confusion flickering across her face. Then, realization hit. She turned her head slightly, locking eyes with Ian. He let out a low chuckle. "I knew you wouldn't die that easily." Jordan blinked rapidly, her body still shaking from the aftereffects of the poison. "I had to make them believe it," she rasped. Ian smirked. "And they did. But now, my dear, it's time to remind them who we really are." Jordan let out a weak, wicked laugh. The world thought they were gone. But they were back. And Victor Newman would never see it coming. The master plan: destroy Victor once and for all. Now that Ian and Jordan had reunited, there was only one thing left to do: finish what they started. Victor had survived too many times. This time, he wouldn't escape. Jordan sat up, still regaining her strength, but her mind was already racing. "Claire," she muttered darkly. "She betrayed me." Ian shrugged, unfazed. "They all did." Jordan's eyes flickered with rage, but she shook her head. "We focus on Victor first. He's the heart of it all. If he falls, the rest will follow." Ian leaned back, pleased. "I like the way you think." The plan was simple. Strike Victor while he was vulnerable. He was still in critical condition, fighting for his life in a hospital bed. Jordan and Ian wouldn't wait for him to recover. They would make sure he never woke up. A town on the brink of terror, Genoa City, had no idea what was coming. Victor's family believed they were mourning his inevitable death. Sharon and Mariah believed they had finally rid themselves of Ian Ward's shadow. Claire believed she had killed Jordan Howard. They were all wrong. Because Ian Ward and Jordan Howard were alive. And they were coming back with a vengeance. Victor Newman had spent his life winning wars, crushing enemies, and surviving against impossible odds. But this time, he wasn't up against just one mastermind. He was up against 2. And the monsters he thought were buried weren't just alive, they were laughing. Victor Newman had cheated death many times. But could he cheat it again?